Hi, I'm Hayley Victoria and welcome back to my crime and policing channel. In today's session we are continuing our exploration of national drivers for change. So it's important when you are studying law and crime and the criminal justice system that you look at things that have had an impact on how these things work. So things that change laws, policies, procedures, acts, schemes, you name it, there's lots of things that have done it. Now, if you're studying A-level, you might have heard things such as campaign for change. That's one of the modules that you will do at A-level. In terms of Pcda, DHEP and Pcda and all your other PEQF type policing courses, you'll be looking at managing risk. And in terms of IPLDIP, you'll also be doing your vulnerability weeks. So everything that you do in terms of studying policing has something to do with these case studies that have changed how things work and how we can police better for the future. And that's what these campaigns have done. Now, unfortunately, the driver, the thing that sparked this change, is usually a case that's been pretty bad. A lot of the time quite catastrophic, actually. And in today's video is a bit of a trigger warning before we get into that. It does involve serious crimes against children in terms of abuse and abduction and the actual murder of a child. So as always with these videos, I do want to just reiterate that although I do talk about real crime and true crime, it's never done in an entertainment purpose. Nothing is ever glamorized. It's purely for educational purposes and to see how things have changed and how we police. So you won't get any scandalous thumbnails and stuff from me. It's all quite, theoretical, and we'll look at scientific elements as well. Today's case specifically, we'll be looking at some crime scene investigation techniques that have been used in relation to forensic science. So this case is harrowing, and although I won't go into massive graphic detail about the crimes, because there's no real need to for what we're talking about today, it is obviously a very difficult subject to discuss, especially those of you who have children. So I remember it happening when it did, and at that point I'd not yet got my daughter because I'm not that old, but it is quite an upsetting case. So that's your trigger warning. So let's get cracking. So today's session we are looking at the Child Sex Offender Disclosure Scheme, also known as Sarah's Law. Now, if you remember, if you've looked at the other videos that I've done, we also looked at Claire's Law, which is Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme. And this is quite similar in terms of how you go about undertaking the requirements and how you would request this procedure to be done. So with everything, I like to go into a little bit of history just so we know why and how things have happened. So we are going to now look at the case that sparked this. So I mentioned the name Sarah, and Sarah Payne was a victim in this horrific crime. She was 8 years old when she vanished, and let's go into that story. So Sarah, she was one of a few children. I think she got 2 brothers and 1 sister. She was a nice little girl, a lovely little girl, beautiful child. She was spending the summer with her grandparents in their house near the coast, and she was playing hide and seek in a cornfield with her siblings. So quite a lovely little summer activity, nothing out of the ordinary there. Like I said, very happy, very lovely little girl with a very loving family. So Sarah was playing with her siblings when she bumped her head and wanted to go home. So she went off back to her grandparents' house. So she was in the cornfield, slipped through the hedge, and on the way back to her grandparents' house. Now, her brother was very close behind her because, he didn't want her to wander off by herself, and also wanted to check on her because she'd hurt her head. So he was just following behind her, as you do. No great urgency. You just wander off, don't you, Miss Kid? You're like, yeah, I'll go and see if she's all right. However, although it was hot on her heels, in the minimal time it took for him to catch up to Sarah, she'd disappeared. But what he did see was a white van driving past, and the driver waved at him. He remembered that the driver was scruffy looking with greasy hair. It looked like he'd not shaved for ages, looked a bit gross. Driven off in a white van, but he waved at him and he was like, do I know this guy? So what I didn't realise at all was that Sarah was in that van So she was in the back of that van and he didn't know. So in that very slim bit of time, she'd been abducted. Now, 16 days later, Sarah was found, unclothed, partially buried at the side of the road with catastrophic injuries. It was 16 days before she was found, like I mentioned, but I mean, only very quickly after she disappeared, a manhunt was on. They were looking for her. It wasn't if they were just like, she'll turn up. There was a massive local hunt for this little girl. And obviously it hit the papers that a young girl was missing. So it wasn't as if nothing was doing. It was it took them a long time to find her. But there was one suspect who popped up to the police straight away. Now, it was 40-year-old Roy Whiting. Now, what the police knew that nobody else knew at the time was that he'd actually already been convicted of a very similar offence, where he'd abducted and seriously sexually assaulted an 8-year-old child, and he'd been in prison for that. And they found him on their database and knew that this guy might be a risk to Sarah, and they arrested him and questioned him. So initially he had, the police officers went to his residence close to where Sarah disappeared from and questioned him, but couldn't get anything out of him. Then some undercover officers arrested him a couple of days later. They questioned him again for 2 days, but they couldn't find anything in which to properly pin the hat on. So he was returned home, released on bail and sent home. And at that point, when he'd been arrested and questioned and released, they hadn't found Sarah yet. So this is prior to finding Sarah, in those 16 days leading up to finding poor little Sarah's body at the side of the road. So as I mentioned, she was unclothed, she'd been suffocated and strangled, and had suffered horrific injuries. So she got a big clump of hair missing, which proves to be quite a key part of the investigation later on. There was also a shoe that was recovered some miles away by a member of the public, which linked this case to Whiting. So it was quite a seamless link there. And that's what they really needed in order to ascertain his guilt. What he did was, he'd said he was at a fun fair in Hove, which was quite away from where they were. And what he was doing there, I don't know. Well, he wasn't, was he? We know he wasn't at a fun fair. So he said he was at a fun fair in Hove, and he wasn't because they found a receipt from a garage where that shoe was found, very close to where the shoe was found by that motorist. So they knew he wasn't in Hove because he got this receipt. There's your lie. Your first lie, we've got some dishonesty there, some deceit. This guy's alibi is not adding up. Sarah she went missing on the 1st of July. On the 23rd of July, Whiting was arrested for a different offence. He was arrested for stealing a car. He stole a car, crashed it, and ended up doing some time in prison. He got sentenced to 22 months for stealing the car and crashing it, because he was driving dangerously, and obviously he'd stolen it, so that's what he was charged for. So he did 22 months in prison. So while we know he's off the streets and he's in prison, the forensic investigators could get to work. They found that on that shoe, there was a Velcro strap on it, the fibres from the seats in the van matched that, and some of the fibres from his jumper matched the fibres found in some of Sarah's hair. So they got fibre matches to this person. They've already got some forensic evidence there. Inside his van as well, because obviously when he was in prison, police had full access to his van. They found sweets, they found ropes, they found cable ties and like baby oil and things. They found this guy's killing kit, his abduction and his killing kit in this van. So I mentioned that there were fibres found in Sarah's hair, but also her hair was found on stuff found in the van as well. So they knew that she'd been in that van. The forensic evidence linked straight to that. He was went on trial, so he was arrested for this, charged with it, and he was in court, Crown Court, obviously, with a crime like this, and he pled not guilty. Obviously, they found him guilty, and he's still in prison to this day. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. And what happened next was what really sparked. So this is obviously the case that sparked it. So he is in prison now. He's still in prison. I don't think he's going to be released until he's like 84 or something, and let's hope he's never released. So we knew, well, the police knew, he was on this record. He was one of the first people to sign the sex offenders register. He was on there. But the family had no idea that someone posing such a risk to their children was so close to them. And they said had they known, they wouldn't have let them play out by themselves. I mean, if they'd known that, they wouldn't have let any of this happen. I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, and parents say things like all the time when, you know, when horrendous things happen. But, I mean, that's different, isn't it? It's not as if you let your kid play outside and they fall over and graze a knee. There's a risk out there, and they could have known about it. And had they known about it, things might have been different. And that's where the Child Sex Offender Disclosure Scheme comes in. So it made papers nationally, the case, obviously, and the fact that he was a registered sex offender. And there was like a mob mentality of people in the UK. They were targeting everybody on this. The News of the World used to be a newspaper before they closed it down for being terrible, phone hacking and stuff. The News of the World started publishing pictures of all the registered sex offenders in the UK and the names and stuff. And so the mobs went for them. People had to move house, all this kind of business. And with some of these mob attacks, obviously, they're so stupid. They attacked a paediatrician, which is a child's doctor, not knowing the difference between a paediatrician and a paedophile. So this is like, it all went up, obviously, as you can imagine. But what did happen is Sarah's Law was introduced in 2011. So I appreciate it's a long time since the crime, but these things take time. So inquests go in, appeals and things, all this different stuff goes in place. These campaigns take a long time to meet fruition. So there are probably some going on right now, like Gracie's Law in the UK. That's currently, they're working on that in the background. So this is the kind of stuff that it does take a long time, but then it can go on to change processes in the criminal justice system forever, which is one thing that can come out of this that, you know, can help other people. Is horrific that the family have had to go through this, but for the subsequent actions, it prevented other people from going through it, at least some of them. So in the first year, there were thousands and thousands of requests, and 200 children were kept safe because of these requests. And obviously that's a long time ago. I think it was 2 years after it came into place, in 2013, 700 paedophiles had been identified through about 5,000 inquiries. So it works. So it works, and it's still going now. So we are looking at Sarah's Law, which is a Child Sex Offenders Disclosure Scheme. And without further ado, let's go through how you would go about doing this. So like the Clare's Law, the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, you've got a right to ask. You have a right to ask if there's somebody in your child's life that poses a risk to them. And you will be told, if you're the person who's got responsibility for that child and you made this request, if they have any previous child abuse offences, if they've got any domestic violence or anything else that might put your child at risk. You won't be told about stuff like, you know, if they got fined for peeing up a bus stop, or if they've shoplifted some bacon or something 10 years ago. You will be told if there's anything relevant in relation to keeping that child safe. It does go through a process similar to the DVDS. So let's go through that. The first thing you would do is you make your initial application. And this could be a concerned family member, close friend, a neighbour, parent, carer or guardian can make this application. But the only person or people who get the information back if there's anything to give are the ones who have got responsibility for that child and keeping that child safe. So you might be a concerned friend, you make this appeal, you call up and ask for this, you know, can I please do this scheme? And you might not be the person to hear about it because you're not the one who's responsible for that child. It can take about 45 days if it's not urgent. If it is urgent, obviously things get acted on immediately. And if you are worried that yourself or anybody else is in danger right now, please call 999 because rather than listening to me talk about it, if you're worried somebody's in danger, call the police now, okay? In immediate risk of harm. So in relation to child sex offenders then, child sexual offenders, it's not as if they commit a crime, they get out of prison and they just wander off. There's something called MAPA, which helps keep monitoring, helps them be monitored while they're out in the public. and groups of people were made aware if there is anybody likely to cause a risk. So an example from this West Yorkshire Police booklet I read was that, say, if there's a leisure centre and this person starts going there, they will be alerted that they might pose a risk to people using the facilities. So MAPA are your multi-agency public protection arrangement, so MAPPA, and that's where partners work together in order to keep people safe from harm. And so in particular in relation to child sexual offenders, they will monitor the offenders and make sure they're not posing a risk to other people in society once they're released from prison and stuff. The first thing you do when making an application is speak to the police. You contact the police. You can go in, you can call them on 101, but like I said, if it's urgent and you think someone's at immediate risk of danger, you call 999. Similar to the domestic violence disclosure scheme, when you speak to an officer, they will ask you why you are submitting this application. So they want to know a bit of background really as to why you're calling it. It might be that you're in a new relationship and you're unsure whether you don't know much about this person's background and you want to make sure that your child is safe around them, which is totally fair, right? Your children are the most important people in the world and you want to make sure that they're safe. And if you're introducing new people into their lives, friends, family, whatever, you don't know much about the background, then it's better to be safe, isn't it? Make the call. So yeah, you contact the police and they would ask, you fill out this form with them and they ask you why you want to do this, etc. So the police will do some checks very quickly, and if they think that child's at a risk immediately, they will do action immediately. They'll immediately step into action. Obviously, if it's something very, very urgent, they don't want to put any children at risk for any longer than they already are. The checks won't be done while you're there, though. They're not just going to whip out PNC and have a look while you're making this request. So there's then another step where you'll have a face-to-face meeting with police officers, again, similar to DVDS, and you need to explain your relationship to the child and all that kind of stuff, your ID, all this, why you're interested and all this kind of stuff, just to make sure that there's nothing like malicious, so you're not just causing trouble and that you're doing it with the best intentions and things. So if applicable, then go to MAPA, so that what I spoke about before, multi-agency public protection arrangement, and discuss if there's anything they need to be aware of. If after they've gone to this group, something comes out of it, so they will go to a multi-agency meeting after that, then if there's something to disclose and it's relevant, the person who's responsible for the child will be told. If you are in danger, the police will obviously let you know, and might phone you, arrange to meet you somewhere, send you a letter. But if it's urgent, obviously they're going to do something a bit quicker than sending you a letter. And they will help give you some advice on how to stay safe and all this kind of stuff. So if you are concerned at all, like I mentioned, do call the police. It's the best thing to do to keep your children safe. And there are lots of other people you can speak to. So the NSPCC have got a helpline. There's something called Stop It Now. They've got a helpline too. And I'll pop some links in the description of the video. So that's Sarah's Law, the Child Sex Offender Disclosure Scheme. And like I said, it's in place. It's helped save a lot of children from harm. And so the national driver was the case of Sarah Payne and the subsequent actions which led for this campaign for change. And change did happen. Unfortunately, obviously, due to the tragic case that preceded it. But, you know, there's now these things in place to help protect other people. I hope that if you've watched the rest of this video, you're okay. And there are some links in the description if you'd like to get any support. In the meantime, stay safe, look after each other, and please don't commit any crimes.